one of the most serious wars which would have spilled over the whole of Asia between India and Pakistan, which would have started in April or May of 2002. And the short story, as most people here will know, that the princely state of Kashmir, its position was never resolved before independence, which led to India and Pakistan being formed. It was semi-resolved after that, but there's been a long-running religious and territorial dispute between India and Pakistan, and 3 wars fought over it. In December 2001, almost certainly Pakistan trained, financed and directed terrorists attacked the Indian House of Commons, the Lok Sabha. And a number of people were killed, and senior members of the government could easily have been killed. That led to a diplomatic démarche with the Pakistanis, a denial by the Pakistanis that they were involved, although they almost certainly were, and then to a build-up of military forces on both sides of the affected border called the line of control. And Colin Powell and I, along with other senior people in the Department of State and the Foreign Office, spent a very large part of our time seeking to avert that military action. One of the things we did was to ensure that one of 6 people, Colin's deputy, a guy called Rich Armitage, and Condoleezza Rice, a man called David Manning, who was Tony Blair's diplomatic advisor, and me, one other. But one of us was always either in India or Pakistan, on the grounds that they were less likely to start a war if we were there. And it may sound like, it's not a piece of conceit, it's just true. It was going to be trickier for them to do this, so we went in for what we called in the trade babysitting. But we also, both India and Pakistan have got nuclear weapons, operational nuclear arsenals. We took the Indians and the Pakistanis through what would happen if they started to fire nuclear missiles at the other. And without going into details, because I can't, what we explained to them about where the fallout would be, how if the Indians let off a nuclear weapon on Islamabad, that the winds were such that it killed a lot of people in India, and the reverse was also true. The Pakistanis would also kill quite a lot of people in Bangladesh. But and what was terrifying was not only the possibility of war, but that neither side had what had developed in the Cold War, what's called a nuclear doctrine, clearly understood when you look what the purpose of nuclear weapons were, apart from deterrent, how you'd apply them, and how you would control, literally and metaphorically, the fallout from them. Nor was there much of any back channel between the military commanders to avoid people going to war by accident. So we tried to sort all that out. The interesting thing is and there were very many dramatic moments, including we decided that it was time to say that Pakistan was a state sponsor of terrorism, which indeed it was, and to some extent still is, and that I was going to be Muggins to say this. And so I said it in Delhi to much approbation, but the arrangement was that I would then get on my plane and go to Pakistan and say the same there. Anyway, talk about a cold reception. There was no one to meet me at the airport. President Musharraf said he wasn't going to see me. The foreign minister wasn't going to see me. I was seen by one of his deputies, and then there was this press conference, which was fantastic. And I repeated it because I just thought, well, I've got to do this. And anyway, it's true, and they know it's true, and they know that I know it's true. And so I said it to great hostility, including constant cross-examination by 2 guys at the front who presented themselves as journalists. And on the way out, I was told by our High Commissioner, these guys were part-time journalists and full-time members of the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate of the Pakistan military. But the last thing I was going to say is really interesting about this. We were desperately trying to get across to the Indians, that as India was growing in economic power and self-confidence, and a burgeoning middle class was being created, the damage that would be done to them if they went to war. And by chance, Colin Powell and I alighted on the thing that was finally going to get across to them, that this would be the case. It has nothing to do with military or sanctions or anything else. We changed the travel advisory. And I think it was on the last day of May, we said that we were withdrawing our staffs from the embassies and high commissions, except for essential staff, and we advised against all but essential travel. And suddenly, the middle classes who had become a dream world, particularly in Delhi, Bombay, Mumbai, thought, Christ, this is really serious, and so they started to be pulling back. But it was a very dangerous period, and as I said, it could easily have led to a war. And it was a good example of a genuine, I think, constructive partnership between us and the United States.
Thank you. Now, talking about Pakistan there, it was accused of being what you said. Why should we today be optimistic about Pakistan, given the relationship with India is unstable, Pakistan is unstable, and has problems with most of its neighbours? Do you see any optimism in Pakistan?
I mean, there was one small reason for being optimistic, which is that there was a relatively peaceful transfer of power in Pakistan, which is the first time this has happened. I say relatively peaceful, but there was an election, and roughly speaking, the result of the election probably reflected the opinion of people who cast their ballots. This is relative, and certainly had a semi-peaceful transfer of power. But I think there would be, otherwise, I think it's very difficult to be optimistic about Pakistan. It's close to being a failed state, and there is no point pretending otherwise. And there's really interesting, these comparative studies have been done, but the really interesting thing about India and Pakistan was that, and there's an even more interesting story about comparing Pakistan and Bangladesh. India and Pakistan were part of the British Raj. India and West Pakistan started off on an even keel. Indeed, West Pakistan was the great commercial centre of Karachi and the breadbasket of the western Punjab. It was in many ways potentially more prosperous than the aggregate of what became independent India. You roll forward to today, getting on for 70 years to today, and what you see is that India's GDP, although still low, is at least 50% higher than Pakistan's GDP. But India is also a country, despite everything, I mean, a rombustious, extraordinary place, but it is a democracy. It's a working democracy. I mean, half the voters of democracies in the world live in India, which is an extraordinary and accurate single fact. So it is a democracy, and it works, and institutionally, I think it's getting better rather than worse, because they're much more open about the corruption, and the judiciary, the senior judiciary, are not corrupt and exercise good authority over some rather corrupt politicians. Pakistan, the country, is still in a turmoil, and in my view it goes back to the coup by General al-Haq many years ago, and it led to a combination of Islamic fundamentalism and military dictatorship, which has been pretty poisonous to the interests of the Pakistan people. It's really serious. And the other interesting thing about Pakistan compared with India is that although we've got a large Indian diaspora, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim and other religions here in the United Kingdom, Indian politics, qua Indian politics, don't spill over here. But Pakistani politics really do spill over here, and that's another thing we have to take into account.
Which, as a former Home Secretary and the MP for Blackburn, tell us what this failed state means then for domestic politics in the United Kingdom.
Well, it means you've got to worry about it. I mean, I'll tell you, but I mean, a very large proportion of Pakistani heritage people just want to live in Britain and get on with their lives. But we had just talking about, but it is bound to mean that parts of Pakistani society can act as a recruiting sergeant for terrorists here, and can lead to that sense of psychological, political and religious isolation, which treats anybody with whom they don't agree as the infidel. I don't know if anybody else saw one of the leaders of the Taliban on the television news last night, explaining in absolutely chilling terms why this wonderful young woman who took a stand against the Taliban who were trying to stop education of children, he explained very coldly and rationally why she had to be killed, because she was siding with the infidel. And of course the infidel are not just those of us who aren't Muslim, but those of us who don't happen to follow that sect. But what I was going to say, just rather optimistic note, so far as the Pakistani heritage community here is concerned, just coming from using from the spotlight on Blackburn. Everybody here will recall that the decision to recall Parliament was taken very quickly in the last week of August, and I happened to be in my constituency, unsurprisingly, and we got together a meeting of interested Labour councillors and members on the evening before the vote took place, and about 20 Muslim Nation Heritage councillors turned up, and they're all Sunni, so I'd expected them, and they're involved in Muslim aid and things, I'd expected them to say, we are in favour of what the Americans are proposing. Anyway, one of them, who was actually Indian heritage, said he was in favour of this, but the Pakistanis said they were against it, and the one who was speaking for them said, listen, Jack, I know they're Sunni, but they're Taliban. We don't want the Taliban taking over Syria like they've taken over Pakistan. And so we don't want to see missile attacks on Syria to give greater power, in their view, to the Taliban in Syria.
You referred to Iran. You spend a lot of time on Iran with many visits, sometimes not with universal support, it must be said, in the establishment, either in the House of Commons or probably in the Foreign Office. Why did you spend so much time on Iran?
I spent time on Iran, but when I got to the Foreign Office, as you all remember, foreign policy life was quiet, and there wasn't much going on. There was Gibraltar chugging away, there was troop levels to Macedonia, but one of other things. But one of the issues on my agenda was, did I, as British Foreign Secretary, go to Iran to formalise the improvement in our diplomatic relations following President Khatami's election, and the fact that we had then had a Sharjah, which is sort of deputy ambassador, and had upgraded the Sharjah to full ambassador status. And Robin Cook had wanted to go on 2 occasions, as you recall, but on 2 occasions he was persuaded not to go, I think, from Israeli pressure. So anyway, I thought I'd long been interested in Iran. I knew a fair bit about its history and our association with Iran, which is not part of common currency here. But if you go to Iran and ask about our involvement in Iran, they'll recite it to you. And they'll run through the way in which we pretty systematically sought to humiliate them from the time when we basically ran the country for a long period. We extorted a tobacco monopoly from them towards the end of the 19th century, which led actually to the beginnings of the rise of the clerics as a political force, because there was a rebellion. Then we back to the Darcy Petroleum Company, now BP, with most extortionate terms for the to obtain oil. I mean, extortion for us and providing the Iranian people with peanuts. When we just made sure we ran Iran during the First World War, because we converted our battleships to oil in 1912, and the main one came from Iran, and it was a route to India. Then we just ran pretty forward, pretty sorry, step-tail. We were discontented with the people running the country, so we found this army officer and made him the Shah. Short story, he's a Shah. He then developed Nazi sympathies, so we moved him out, got his son in. We in the Soviet Union and took the country over. We actually invaded the country and ran it between 1941 and 1946. And then in 1953, we in the CIA removed a democratically elected Prime Minister, Mossadegh, and then we carried on supporting the Shah after throughout the 1970s, when he'd been running the most corrupt and vicious regime until it was too late. And apart from that, our relationship with Iran was okay. So that's the history there. If you know, and that's what they'll tell you. And there's also, you'll recall this great joke. It's not so much a joke from an Iranian point of view that Iran is the only country in the world that still believes that Britain is a superpower. But you can see why they do it. And so I knew the history. Also, this is a country of 80 million people, hugely important strategically. And post 9/11, President Khatami really reached out to the West, while Saddam Hussein was organising demonstrations celebrating the collapse of the Twin Towers and the death of all its Americans. Khatami organised peaceful tributes to the Americans who lost their lives, and was incredibly helpful with the invasion of Afghanistan, and could have continued to be helpful. So, and then President Bush and the neocons pulled the rug from under Khatami's feet by including Iran in the Axis of Evil speech in January 2002. And anyway, that happened. As you'll recall, was that it emerged that Iran had failed to disclose details of its nuclear dossier, and the consequence of that was that we decided we needed to have negotiations with Iran. And one of the sort of rather odd results of the Iraq war was that it had led to Dominique de Villepin, the French foreign minister, Joschka Fischer, the German foreign minister, and I having some pretty intense arguments and spats, not least in the Security Council. But it also led to a cementing of our friendship. And so quite shortly after the Iraq invasion, the three of us were talking about Iran, and to tell a very long story short, we agreed that what we should do is, as the three countries, seek to take an initiative with Iran to see whether we can resolve the problems on the nuclear dossier. And that led to what is now the E3+3 negotiations, which have just been resumed. So, and if you want to solve the problem of Afghanistan, to a degree Pakistan, certainly the problems in Iraq, absolutely certainly the problems in Lebanon, and to a significant degree the problems in Syria, you need to have a constructive relationship with Iran. And that's why I'm so pleased that Dr. Rouhani was elected as president. And I think there is every possibility of some kind of rapprochement being reached with Iran, provided that the United States and Britain, amongst others, recognise the limitation of action on Rouhani and don't do to Rouhani what the Bush administration did to Khatami.
But as a result of the 3+3 efforts, sanctions, UN sanctions in place, EU sanctions in place, but no change in the nuclear program.
Sorry, excuse me, do you need to talk a little closer to the microphone? That's up to
Let me try and shout, okay. In terms of sanctions, UN sanctions, EU sanctions, against Iran.
But like a cigarette.
I could never say either. The truth is, today, we're no further forward in stopping Iran. Negotiations may be starting, but the fact of the matter is the sanctions haven't worked. What's the answer if these negotiations don't take us forward? Is it military action against Iran?
Now, I'm quite clear that there are no circumstances I can conceive of where military action against Iran would work or be sensible. And I'm sort of reassured in that position by the fact that the recently retired heads of the two Israeli intelligence agencies, Mossad and Shin Bet, are both of the same view. You would simply make a very difficult situation across the borders into a catastrophe, and it wouldn't resolve the problem at all. With respect, as they say, first of all, I don't agree that sanctions have done nothing in respect of Iran's nuclear program. The national intelligence estimate of the US in 2007 was that they had abandoned their active development of a nuclear weapon in 2003. And there's been no evidence since that they've resurrected it. They have gone in for higher and higher grade enrichment of uranium. And whilst there's no, and we need to stop that, but at the same time, they can say that they're entitled to enrich uranium, which indeed they are under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And on the sanctions, I think there's little doubt that the sanctions that have been imposed have led to also quite significant difficulties in the economy, and it's that is one of them, as well as the desire for freedom, which led to the demise of any Ahmadinejad Mark II candidate getting elected and to Rahman being elected.
Of course, there is a counter view that, in fact, it's a matter of months or a few years before they go from where they are to having a nuclear weapon. Lots of very good reports in that sense. But I know the audience has...
Well, let me just deal with that one. I mean, it is possible that, I don't think it's likely, I think that Iran will develop a nuclear weapon. My own sense is, and most predictions are, that what they seek to do, or might be supposed to develop the intellectual and technical capacity to be able to build a nuclear warhead and missile delivery system quite quickly, but not actually to go to that point. But if they had developed a nuclear weapon, well, we then have to make decisions about how we handle it. I mean, Israel has a nuclear weapon system already, and this tends not to be talked about in polite company, but you can't ignore the fact that they refuse to sign up to any kind of international instruments at all, so and they deny their existence, so everybody knows they have got a full range of nuclear weapons available to them. And although they would say they don't threaten other countries, that's not necessarily, they don't threaten other countries by nuclear weapons, but they do ensure that they are militarily very powerful within the Middle East, which is one of the reasons why they can go into the West Bank and East Jerusalem and steal other people's land. And if they didn't have that military power, they wouldn't. Now, India and Pakistan do nuclear weapon space. Pakistan much less stable than Iran, and we simply have to work out how to accommodate them. And my view is that if the Iranians were to obtain nuclear or develop nuclear missiles, this would be really stupid for them, because it would then lead to permanent sanctions and it would lead to a powerful policy of military, not a military attack, but a military containment. I can't for life see what they would gain from it. Thank you.
If I may, let me turn to Iraq as a last subject. You and I were looking at the same sort of intelligence, part of the same discussions taking place. You, of course, much more directly involved in it. I, at the time, fully supported the intervention. Headquarters, my wife in front, consistently argued against. And with hindsight, with the benefit of what I now know about intelligence, and the way it all turned out. I personally regret the fact that I supported it. Do you regret your support?
Well, I faced the same family situation, by the way, as I bring out in my book. I asked that question in two ways. If I'd known at the time, in February, March 2003, what I came to know, both about the fact that Saddam Hussein, in one way or another, disposed of the unquestioned nuclear and chemical and biological weapons arsenals which he had, would I have proposed that we take military action? No, for sure. Indeed, there wouldn't have been a justification for taking military action. No casus belli at all. Thinking back on it, would I have made the same decision facing the same set of facts as only those facts which we thought were accurate? Yes, I think I would. And I've also felt, since I was very much responsible for persuading the House of Commons to take military action, you can't suddenly call for a bowl of water and say, well, I'm just going to wash my hands of this lot. You need to explain yourself as to why you came to that view. And what I've tried to bring out in a lot of the work I've done, the lectures I've given on this, questions I've answered, is that for me, the argument was never particularly about intelligence at all, because we knew on the public record, first of all, we knew how aggressive Saddam had been. Missile attacks in 5 countries, invading too. We knew about what his nuclear ambitions had been, and we also knew about these vast chemical and biological weapon systems. And we knew too that he'd been adept at hiding these from inspectors, as he did in the whole of the biological weapon system from inspectors until his son-in-law had defected 4 years after the inspectors had started. So we knew all of that. And above all, we knew that he had a whole series of obligations on him under the United Nations, and he failed to meet them. And for me, in terms of psychological terms, I had negotiated with the US, France and Russia particularly, what became Resolution 1441, and I dearly wished and believed that that resolution could have resolved the Iraq crisis peacefully, and it could have done it, by the way. And it was the failure of the Iraqi regime to comply with that resolution that led me, very late in the day, to decide that I would be in favour of military action. And I have to bear the responsibilities for that.
After the adoption of 1441, and indeed in the run-up to it, the argument was consistently put out by officials and by ministers that a second resolution would be necessary. Certainly, a major effort was made to get a second resolution. When the second resolution wasn't attainable, it then became public that the legal argument still applied, and without the second, it would be legitimate and legal to actually go to war. Was the British intervention always predetermined, regardless of whatever happened in the United Nations?
No, not remotely. First of all, if you won't mind me correcting, it was never said, certainly not by me, that we needed a second resolution. And quite the reverse. And you'll know, because this came out in the Emyr Parry, that there was a bit of a difference of emphasis between the legal advisor to the Foreign Office and myself about whether or not we did need a second resolution. But the legal advisor to the UK representation in New York at the United Nations, working at the time for Jeremy Greenstock, reckoned we didn't need a second resolution anyway. The politics argued very strongly in favour of a second resolution, and we worked very hard to try and get one. But legally, and I can bore you to everybody here to screaming for mercy about legal arguments, but legally, I don't think there's any doubt about it, Peter Goldsmith, that we didn't need a second resolution if there'd been what's called a further material breach of 1441, which resurrected the first Gulf War resolutions of 687 and 778. United States, it certainly wasn't done by me. And we just don't rely just this. One of the things about these have now come out in the Iraq Inquiry and in my book, but in the summer of right at the end of July 2002, there'd been various discussions about Iraq. Because once we got Kashmir, India-Pakistan settled, and then there was an intense period before the summer break discussing Iraq. And I wrote a handwritten letter to Tony Blair, talking about my concerns about how the argument over Iraq was developing, and saying that he needed to be careful because if he wasn't, quite the only regime change would be taking place across the road, across the road from the Foreign Office, which is Downing Street. And then in early March 2003, and bear in mind that the decision was made by the House of Commons on the 18th of March, there was a meeting which I attended where I said to Tony, I don't think we're going to get this through, Tony. I just don't think the numbers are there. This is not about me resigning and just telling you the regime change will be in this room. And so I say there wasn't a Faustian pact. What there was a strategy which led, if Saddam made the wrong choices, was likely to lead to military action. And one of the reasons was, after the Iraq War, I very publicly ruled out any participation by the United Kingdom in military action against Iran, was because I had seen from that experience, if you keep the option open, then the option of military action becomes more attractive in a strange kind of way, and the option of a peaceful solution becomes less attractive.
Of course, Jack, I didn't accuse you of having said that the second resolution was necessary. I did say that others went around arguing that.
Okay.
And of course, the optic looks very strange when you're arguing strenuously for one. When you can't get it, you then say, oh, we don't need it anyway. And that's what most public opinion saw. But the question I'd like to ask you, post the invasion, Saddam has fallen. What went wrong? Certainly, we took our eye off Afghanistan, with consequences there, but what went wrong in Iraq?
What went wrong was very straightforward. And then can I suggest we take some...
Yeah, one other question.
What went wrong was there was a failure by the United States to put into practice strategies and plans which the State Department under Colin Powell and the British Foreign Office had worked on about the governance and reconstruction of Iraq post the invasion. And even as late as mid-February 2003, I remember Conan coming to a lunch at the Security Council after we had a meeting with the Security Council, and he said, look, the United States had done nation building before, we rebuilt Japan, we rebuilt Germany, we've got very detailed plans to rebuild Iraq, and they had. But there was then an interagency row between Colin Powell and Don Rumsfeld in the Department of Defense. Rumsfeld won, the State Department was excluded so effectively, were we, and then you have the military force of the United States in Iraq, but just a handful of poorly trained people to run the governance of a country of 22 million people in 18 provinces. So, and then it went from bad to worse, and the single most catastrophic decision was the decision of Jerry Brown, who by this stage was the coalition authority, without proper consultation in Washington, to de-Ba'athify the whole of the Iraqi security forces. So rather than doing what we did with the Nazis, which is to take out the top layer and to accept that everybody else, being a Nazi or Nazi administrator, because they needed to live. I think a couple of million people in the security forces, the police and so on, civil administration, were simply taken out because they had association with the Baathists, which led to disaffection of a couple of million senior influential people, and then taking arms out, and then where the arms stouts were. I mean, it was really, really serious.
Thank you. And the question I've been asked to ask, but which follows from something you said, turning to Syria,
Yeah.
in the last 2 years, had you been Foreign Minister then, you put together a blocking resolution in the House of Commons, but what would you have done as Foreign Secretary of Syria?
I think that I probably would have shared the optimism of William Hague and most other observers that the Assad regime was a fragile and brittle one that was likely to fall much more quickly because of self-evidently it has. What I would have done differently is seek the much more active involvement of the Iranians, and I would have developed relations with the Iranians. I mean, despite the fact that Ahmadinejad was there, but they're very tricky to deal with, but you don't choose the countries you have to work with in international diplomacy. Indeed, the most difficult ones are the ones you really want to work on. And if you'd had half-decent relations with the Iranians, and also better relations with the Russians, then I think we may have ended up with a more realistic table of what's going on